I can be sad in a moment or any given day with a family or a patient, but it's not my pain to take home. I don't know what it's like to be in their shoes for half a second. I don't know what it's like to have, their child with X, Y, or Z disorder and what that's going to mean for them. And I certainly at never any point would say it's going to be okay, because it may never be okay again. And so all I can do is just be there and help them through that journey the best I can.
Hello, my name is Wing, and welcome to A Work in Purpose, the podcast for you to hear inspiring stories of how people have found their purpose in life, and insights and tips on how you can find yours too. Before I introduce you to our next guest this episode, let me share some context. In my family, my dad, my aunt, my uncle, and possibly my grandfather all die from a hereditary disease called amyloidosis. As with many genetically hereditary diseases, I too had a 50-50 chance of having this fatal disease. And for many years, I really hesitated to get the test done to see if I had it myself. Since there was no cure, I thought, what was the point? Would it change the way I live? Would it make me cherish and make the most out of life more? Or would it lead me down a downward spiral? Who knows? But then one day, after some nudging from loved ones, I finally got the test done. And that was how I knew our guest this episode, Claire Egan. Claire was the genetics counselor who counseled me before the test to make sure I understood the implications of the results. And she was the one to deliver the news after. After I anxiously waited for weeks for the results, I finally got the news from Claire that my test came back negative. Meaning that I did not carry the fatal gene. And wow, that was such a relief. But then it also got me thinking, since genes have a 50-50 chance of passing down, for every good news Claire shares, there's someone else receiving devastating news. So how does someone like Claire tell such news? And how does Claire do it on a daily basis? And why? What's her motivation for doing such deeply heavy yet very important work? So listen to this fascinating episode to find out how Claire found her purpose in her work as a genetics counselor, and hear her advice on how you can find your purpose so you too can become a work in purpose. Welcome to A Work in Purpose podcast, Claire Egan. I'm so excited to have you on. So you are a genetic counselor. So what exactly do you do?
What do? I help people understand and make sense of genetic information, their genetic information more specifically. I help people. I'm not a geneticist. I'm not a genetic doctor. I'm not in the business of diagnosing genetic conditions, but I help facilitate genetic testing, and I help patients understand what a genetic test result may or may not mean for them and other family members. And so ultimately it ends up being sometimes that we do end up with a diagnosis for someone. And so I help people navigate what does a genetic diagnosis mean for them and what it may mean for their kids or extended family members. Yeah, I think that's it in a nutshell. I help people understand something that is exceptionally personal, but at the same time can be highly complex. And so my job is to break down something that is highly complex and help them understand it better.
I see. So how often do you have to deliver heavy news to people about bad genetics results?
That's an interesting question, because some people think automatically that having a positive result, meaning that they were found that there's an underlying genetic issue going on, that would be heavy news, and it can be. But sometimes when we have someone or a family where they know that they have something going on, sometimes a negative test result can be the heavy information because they don't have a why. They're still out there in the unknown. I know there's something going on. I know I have these issues, but I still don't know why, or I don't have information to share with my children, adult or pediatric children, that they could then use for themselves. So sometimes a negative result can be as impactful or heavy as a positive result. A lot of my time is spent doing pre-test counselling, and that means that we're talking to individuals about doing genetic testing, what that test, exploring what that test may or may not mean for them from a medical standpoint, from a future standpoint, maybe adult onset later on condition. And so oftentimes in an appointment that can be an hour and a half, that appointment in and of itself can be heavy because we're exploring what this predictive testing may mean for that individual. And oftentimes they've watched a family member, a parent or an aunt or a grandparent go through this disorder that may be devastating to them. And so the pre-test counselling in and of itself can be heavy, even though we don't have a positive test result there. So part of the training that we go through is very much we're trained to be healthcare professionals who are helping someone go through an exceptionally personal journey. And part of that, going through that journey, is to walk with someone and be there with them while they are potentially going through some of the most devastating time in their life ever, be that a diagnosis or a diagnosis in a child. And my role is to help them through that process and through that journey. And my role is to be there with them in that. And I have no right to add to someone's pain as they're going through it. And I have no right to take their pain away either. That individual is allowed to be sad or angry or completely devastated. And all I can do is just be there with them as they go through that. And part of the training is to not be detached from the person. We're very much engaged with the person and the patient at the time, but to not take it home with me. It's just being there with someone. It's not my pain and I'm not entitled to it. I can be sad in a moment or any given day with a family or a patient, but it's not my pain to take home. I don't know what it's like to be in their shoes for half a second. I don't know what it's like to have, their child with X, Y, or Z disorder and what that's going to mean for them. And I certainly at never any point would say it's going to be okay, because it may never be okay again. And so all I can do is just be there and help them through that journey the best I can and not take it home with me at the end of the day.
Wow. So on a given day, like how many news do you have to give that is on the heavier side?
So I see in a week, in my current position, I see about 17 patients that are here first time up front before we do any testing. And then there'll be anything from anywhere from 2 to 6 or 7 results appointments in a week. And every appointment's different, so it's hard to put a number on it to say how many of those appointments are heavy. I always say no one comes to genetics because they're fine, right? Or, because everything is great around them, either in the family or with themselves. So we talk about difficult things often, many times during the day.
Yeah. So what made you get into this field?
So why?
Yeah.
The big why. Let me hydrate here. So I started off my adult working life as an analytical chemist in Scotland in industry. And I moved to the States with my now husband, then partner. And it's about 21 years ago we moved to the States, and I got a job doing analytical work in an academic setting. And I was doing mass spectrometry, which was great, but the academic setting was actually a biology lab. And I had never had a biology class in my life. And my principal investigator in the lab, she started getting me doing bench work, biology experiments very early on. And I realized I had a passion for biology. My background had been analytical chemistry, which is quite dry. And so the biology was kind of mind-blowing to me, just in how fascinating we were, humans were, organisms were. And just through timing, I would say, my visa expired that I was working on, and my husband and I had gotten married prior to the visa expiring. He was here on a particular working visa, and as his wife, I couldn't work any longer, but I could go back to school, I could study. So I went back to university and I did a biology degree, molecular, cellular and developmental biology. And as part of that course, the genetics program, we had a guest speaker one day, and she was the program director from the University of Colorado. genetic counselling programme, and she presented genetic counselling as an alternative career for biology majors. There was kind of traditionally two paths. You're either going to go into medicine and become a doctor, or you're going to become a bench scientist. And I had spent a lot of time in labs, and being a bench scientist just didn't really do it for me. I was good with my hands, but I wasn't a brilliant bench scientist. I was never going to be an academic. And medicine I often questioned whether I was smart enough to be a doctor. Many years of studying and a lot of time, a lot of money, and I just didn't think I had what it took to be a doctor. Maybe that was just some self-doubt. So the program director gave her lecture on what it was to be a genetic counsellor and how you can impact lives and what they do, what genetic counsellors do. And I remember sitting in a giant lecture hall with a couple of 300 other students. And I literally said, it's funny that you talk about this aha moment, but I literally said, that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And so I then finished my undergrad worked in a lab for a little while.
What about that gave you the aha moment? What was it?
It was so for some time, just to give you some context to it, for some time, my husband had said to me, you've got something. When you talk to human beings, you have something, they open up. They tell you things, whether you've asked them or not, they just start telling you things. You can make an instant connection. And that piece of my personality, I would say, is genetic. My dad was exactly the same. He could go anywhere and talk to strangers. And, if we turn our back for 5 seconds, we turn back and he's made a new friend. And I've always had that philosophy that a stranger is just your potential next best friend. You just haven't said hello to them yet. So I've always found joy with humans and interacting with humans. And when Carol, the program director, presented the career, it seemed like a perfect splice of human genetics, so science, really fascinating science, coupled with human interaction. And so being able to put those two things together, it just seemed perfect. Yeah. It just seemed perfect. My husband had always been pushing when I was in the lab. He had always been kind of not pushing, but kind of trying to encourage me to think about going into some kind of sales, maybe pharma sales. You could be really successful. You can go into doctors' offices and sell medication, and the doctors will love you and they'll buy the drugs and you'll make loads on commission. And having worked in a lab for many years, I knew that there was no way I was going into sales to go around trying to sell something to somebody. I just can't do it. I couldn't do it. And I think it can be as equally important to know what you don't want to do, if not more important to know what you don't want to do, as well as thinking about because some people say, I don't know what I want to do. Do you know what you don't want to do? Well, then that's taken care of. Yeah, I think it can be as equally as important. Yeah. Yeah. So I'd always had this, I knew that humans brought me joy, and being able to couple that with real basic science, it was just perfect. People often ask me if I have a disorder that I am passionate about, a specific disorder, a specific body system, and, really specialize in it. And for me, my answer has always been the same in the past 11 years. I am first and foremost a counsellor who counsels in genetics, and it doesn't really matter the disorder. For me, the key is the counselling piece. I can find information. That's just information. We can find that. It's available. We know where to look that up. It's the counselling piece that's huge for me. That's where I get the most joy. So when you had your aha moment that you wanted to go into genetics counseling, what was your next aha moment? Like perhaps your first few counseling sessions that kind of solidify, this is the right decision that I've made. What was that like? I would say the first couple of rotations, I was in a prenatal setting, and it was through your training program. You very quickly get sent to a clinic and you're shadowing geneticist or another genetic counsellor. And the first couple of sessions, you're kind of just like a deer in the headlights. I'm speaking to humans. I'm meant to be talking about genetics. I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't have children. My husband and I had never planned to have children, and I had never ever contemplated pediatric clinic. And I thought, I'm older than some of my classmates. I'm coming at this from a slightly different angle, maybe, being slightly older, more life experience, maybe in some regards. I'm going to go into cancer. That's going to be cancer genetics. That's going to be counselling heavy. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into cancer. And then I went to my first paediatric rotation, and I walked away from that just in awe and shock. I've never really wanted to have children, but there was a loud voice in my gut saying, that's what you're going to do. You're going to be a paediatric counsellor. And it gets back to that kind of knowing what you don't want to do, kind of, and realising what you don't want to do, and listening to those things when they happen. When my gut talks to me, I try and listen. I don't wait for a second or third kind of nudge from it. I tend to listen when there's something going on in here, and I need to pay attention to that. And so I was very confused why I just felt like this was what I needed to do. And so I requested a second paediatric rotation. When you're in your second year, you can say, is there anything that you would like to spend more time in, maybe, hone some skills, or, you don't always get the clinic you're asking for. But I was fortunate enough to get a second paediatric rotation, and I realised that the thing, and I've realised this over the years, people ask me, you don't have children, what is it about paediatric clinics that makes it the thing for you, or did for a while? No child asked to be born. And so we're all born, and now we have a child that has a genetic disorder, or potentially has a genetic disorder. There's something going on significant. And being able to help families navigate their way through that, their most precious being in all the world, something's not quite as it should be. And I could be there in an exceptionally supportive role and help them understand something, again, reasonably complex in some of their most darkest and devastating moments, and just be there in a supportive role with them. Working with children as well, I have many friends who have families, and they often ask me, how can you do what you do? How can you go in there and talk to families? And I think in some level, not having children makes it easier for me, because I can't bring it home and relate to this potentially happening to my child. So I think it made me a better counsellor in the paediatric setting. But that was my second aha moment, was when my gut told me that I was going to be a paediatric genetic counsellor. And it was palpable.
Can you maybe share one particular impactful experience just to help us listeners really understand what it is really like to be you?
Sometimes I can walk away from my desk feeling like I have done a good job, and it's been the most devastating call ever, because you were there and present and engaged and helped someone understand something. Or it's not even just helping someone understand something, that's just facts that you're helping someone understand. The key for me is when, despite not knowing anything at all about someone, I can help in some way make them feel profoundly understood. When ultimately I don't understand, right? I'm not in their position. I'm not getting this devastating diagnosis. But helping someone just feel like they are understood in any moment in time, that I can appreciate in some level what they're going through, or it's empathy, really. It's just being empathic, which is key to the job in terms of what we do. Mm-hmm. So as I was saying, sometimes giving someone the most devastating news, a positive test result, can be, I don't want to say joyous for me. It's never joyous, but it is fulfilling in the sense that you help guide them. I helped guide them through that devastating piece of information and news, and talk about next steps, and acknowledging that this is devastating, acknowledging that this is not a good diagnosis. Let's say we're doing predictive testing for something like Huntington's disease, adult onset condition for which we have no cure at this point in time. And I have a 43-year-old who has watched their father go through this disorder. We know it's in the family, and they want to do predictive testing. And if they test positive, they will develop the condition. If they test negative, then they're out of the woods. They're not at increased risk of developing the condition. And so I don't ever want to give anyone that positive result. But going through the process, the pre-test counselling is heavy. We spend a lot of time going through the decision tree. Why are we doing the testing now? They'll have many reasons for doing the testing now. I just need to know is one of the big answers. I can plan, so I can make financial arrangements, so I can make decisions on whether or not to have children, so I can tell my children what their chances of having this condition. So there's many, many reasons why somebody wants to know. And oftentimes I just need to know is the answer, because the 50% chance that they have inherently of having the condition from their parent is just so overwhelming to them that they just need to know. If I'm negative, then it's the best news ever. But if I'm positive, then now I know I'm truly positive, and I can move on with that and go through what I need to go through. So we do a lot of pre-test counselling. Why now? What's going on in your life? Let's talk about your relationships. Let's say your father had the condition. Will you tell your mom if you test positive? Will you tell your mom regardless of the test results? How do you think your mom will feel knowing that her life partner has gone through this disorder, now knowing that their child is going to go through this disorder, thinking about family dynamics? Let's say there's multiple siblings that are thinking about doing testing. What if one sibling's positive and one sibling's negative? There's something that we refer to as survival guilt, where the sibling who's negative gets overwhelmed with guilt because their sibling tested positive and they don't have the condition. So there's lots of things to explore: family dynamics, finances, your marriage, your spouse. Is your spouse on board? What's your support mechanisms? Who is your support? Who's your person? How do you typically deal with difficult situations? So exploring all of those things with someone right up front, so that when the results come back, we're not spending all of our time thinking about all of those things for the first time. When the results come back, it's very much, do you still want to know the information? And I don't spend any time at all. In fact, I will just deliver the results, because nobody's going to listen to anything you have to say until you actually deliver the results. And when you do deliver a positive result in the predictive testing realm, you just have to be comfortable with silence for some time. And that can be in the room with a family or a patient, or over the phone with a family or a patient. But just be comfortable with silence and allow them to be what they need to be in that moment. There is no rushing something. There is no, asking follow-up questions. How do you feel about that? It's just being quiet and patient and letting the patient be what they need to be in that moment. And just being there with them in that silence and letting them guide where they're going to go next. Some people switch to, okay, right, well, thanks for that. Okay, so will you be sending me a copy of my report? And they just go into kind of logic, shut down. I'm not in a place to talk about this right now. Other people may go to pieces immediately right there on the phone, and we just go through whatever that's going to be. Oftentimes, I will schedule another follow-up appointment in a couple of weeks and check back in, just circle back, because sometimes people have a million questions as soon as I hang up the phone, and they realise that they haven't asked all of these questions because they were too busy falling apart when I've given them the news. And so we circle back and have a follow-up check-in just to see how people are and what questions they have, or what questions or maybe family members have, what questions their spouse has. And then ultimately at the end of all of that, I help make connections with maybe support groups or foundations or providers that we make recommendations for follow-up appointments with a neurologist or a cardiologist, etc. So we help make connections in that level too.
Thanks for sharing that. If you are comfortable, would you mind sharing maybe like one journey that one of your patients went through with you? Like, why did they see you, and what happened throughout their journey process?
So many. There are... The pediatric setting is an interesting journey. They're all interesting. They're all interesting because there's humans involved all the time. And seeing, as part of my role in the pediatric clinic, part of my job is to work in the neonatal intensive care. So if genetics got a call, an infant's born, significant issues going on, I would say that is potentially as raw as you would find any humans being brand new parents to a child that's born maybe prematurely with significant birth defects, significant medical issues, and exceptionally raw. And depending on which day you see the parents, maybe it requires checking in several times. Oftentimes, parents are not in a place of listening or hearing when you're talking, especially about something like human genetics. They don't care. They just want their baby to breathe. They want their baby's heart to work. And the why at that moment in time is maybe not their key focus. I just need my baby to eat food. I need my baby to, nurse or whatever that is. So that is literally the start of the journey for that family, that moment in time in the NICU. And genetics are often a part of that, where you're helping that couple diagnose what's going on with their baby. Following the NICU stay, when the baby gets discharged, we always have a follow-up in the genetics clinic, or typically have a follow-up in the genetics clinic. And I often wish, and in some moments have even said it, I've said to parents in the NICU, I wish I could give you a crystal ball and show you what life is going to be like in 2 years. I don't know what life's going to be like, but I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to show them how resilient humans actually are, resilient they as parents actually are. Because when we see the child then coming into the genetics clinic, follow-up appointment, maybe 6 months, then a year, then we see them annually. And after a couple of years, the parents come in and they are, leader of the support group for the foundation for the particular genetic condition. And they are, cheerleaders for other families and that are going through the same similar journey that they went through. And they have grown and they're now resilient, as I wish I could have shown them. And you see it regularly when you start that journey in the NICU. To then being resilient human beings and resilient parents and really doing a remarkable job with their child. And very early on, parents they're grieving the loss of the perfect child, and all of the hopes and dreams that they thought they had for their child are just being taken away in an instant. And then over the course of the next couple of years, you can then watch families when they come back to the clinic and they're telling you that the child achieved, they were sitting up. Okay, they didn't sit up at the regular time, but they sat up and they're taking their first steps, or they're cruising furniture. It may be later than what the textbooks tell you that your child typically should be meeting those milestones, but those milestones are getting celebrated in a way that was unimaginable before. So they're coming around to readjusting their hopes and dreams. And we have to keep reminding parents that it's your hopes and dreams for your child. We didn't know what your child was going to do anyway, but they were taken away in the first instant, soon after their child was born. And then we're watching them put hopes and dreams back out there, back together. Yeah, most of the time, when families do come back to the clinic, they've grown with the diagnosis. They've grown with their child with the diagnosis, and oftentimes, and I've said it to families in the past that they'll ask me, how do I talk to people about this genetic condition? What do I say? And I'm always reassuring that anyone else on the outside, including your child, is as okay with the diagnosis as you are. And it's about becoming comfortable yourself with a diagnosis. And oftentimes, people's discomfort with a genetic condition is because of how they have perceived other people in the world with genetic conditions and their own fears of the genetic condition, or their own not really understanding what that condition is. And so reading and support groups and education, they become comfortable sometimes with a genetic diagnosis. And so their child and other people around them become as comfortable with the diagnosis as they are, often, not always.
So it sounds like the fear is more of the unknown, and once something is known, then people know what to do with the next steps, right?
Even if it's a devastating known, at least now I have something tangible. They went from X, Y, or Z symptoms, whatever that may be. Maybe it's a neuropathy, lose numbness, pain, tingling in their hands or feet, to here's why this is happening. And now they have something tangible. Maybe it's a Child with autism. Now we have a why. My child has autism. It wasn't something that I did. It wasn't something that I didn't do, either during pregnancy or early in infancy or childhood. I now know why. And it oftentimes doesn't change a single thing for the individual who has autism. That particular genetic change is in almost every cell in their body from just before or just after they were conceived. And there was nothing that anyone did that made that happen. It doesn't change a single thing about who they are. We understand, the families know all of their strengths and qualities. The family knows all of the challenges that that child has had, or that person has had. Now they understand why. Changes nothing, but having that something tangible can change absolutely everything on some level for a family.
Yeah. So you mentioned that as a part of your training, you kind of learn how to not take things personally and whatnot, but you can have all the training in the world and it will still be very challenging. And I would assume most people won't be able to handle a job like this. So how do you personally avoid burnout and to not take things personally? And also, how do you continue doing this without it getting sort of routine and then you sort of function with this role with losing the human touch?
Right. Burnout is hard. It's quite common in our field. We, like many healthcare providers, see lots of patients, and we're not, as I said, people rarely come to genetics because it's, everything's fine. They're not coming in for a well child visit or just an annual checkup, where people are coming in for a reason. And so burnout is a real thing in our profession. We're notoriously not in it for the money. No one says they ever come into genetic counselling for the money. It's always to do with the patients and how to help, and our interest for science and the human angle. In terms of not letting it get to me, I think I do a very good job at keeping someone else's pain, diagnosis, journey separate from me. The things I have found challenging over the years, specifically in the pediatric setting, is social situations. So maybe children who have come through, they come to genetics because there is suspicion of child abuse and we have to rule out a genetic condition. So maybe a child has multiple fractures, and part of the process is mum and dad or a family member abusing this child, or do they have an underlying genetic condition that gives them brittle bones and makes them more susceptible to fractures? So that is challenging. Seeing a lot of children coming through the foster system, an adoption system, where maybe we're ruling out a genetic condition because there's maybe a case of fetal alcohol syndrome against mom. Maybe she drank heavily in pregnancy. So part of saying that fetal alcohol syndrome is what's happening with, or what has happened with the child, is ruling out a genetic diagnosis, because children can have similar features of those, with those two things going on. So I would say the hardest thing for me is just social things where I can't make a difference. I can't help that child's past. And that was, in the pediatric setting, very challenging. Those were the days where I would leave work and cry, because it was just heartbreaking. And you're allowed to be sad. As a human being, you're allowed to be sad that this situation is so devastating, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it, except play a role and coordinate the testing and help them understand the results, and that either plays a part in the outcome of a case or it doesn't. So I found that was for sure the hardest part. Oftentimes, someone's genetic test result helps me keep things in perspective. So, I don't know. I go to make dinner and we're out of onions. The worst thing that happened to me today is that we're out of onions. To be, simple about it, I didn't get a devastating genetic diagnosis. And so it helps me very much keep things in perspective.
Yeah. Wow. So on any given day when you do feel sad, what do you do to kind of bounce back up personally?
Oh, I'll cry. There will be crying. It's part of the training as well and as you're going through genetic counselling school, certainly the programme I went through, we were often asked to reflect, self-reflection. And the reason that we self-reflect is to help us in our jobs later to remain present with someone, where maybe someone says something in a session and you feel angry. And now all of a sudden you're thinking about your own emotions and you've lost the person. You're no longer connected with the person. So the self-reflection is, okay, what did they say? Why did that make you angry? And what was the trigger there? And how do you prevent that from happening again? What was it about that situation that made you sad or angry or whatever it was that you recognized yourself feeling in that moment in time? How do you recognize those triggers and then work through so that you don't have that reaction the next time that it happens? And it's because it's not personal. And so self-reflection was a big part of our training so that we can remain engaged with someone regardless of what's happening. Now, there are moments now and again where some things still happen and it's still sad, or you have to remind yourself, this is not about me. This is whatever frame of mind this person is in at this point in time is not my fault. But it's hard sometimes when you are just human, and maybe someone is being angry at you or offensive or they're just having a really bad day and you happen to be the one that they're taking it out on. And so it's hard. So there is crying. Number one, there is crying. Exercise. I like to run in a previous life. I now like to road bike, hike, great outdoors, fresh air, skiing. And it's interesting, I talk a lot to people about self-care and patience and being okay with whatever you're feeling in the moment and knowing when to ask for help. And I'd say I'm maybe the world's worst about knowing when to ask for help. I tell people to do it all day and I get to a certain point, and when I get to that point, then I know it. Either it's friends or my husband or supervisor at work. I need help. And I'm okay. I've become a lot more comfortable saying I need help. Yeah.
That's good. That's good to hear. Do you ever get afraid that one day you'll be so numb to all of this heaviness that one day you'll just end up being very clinical and, very blasé about what you do?
I've always said that when that feeling happens, it's time for a change. And it's either exploring a different specialty, maybe it's exploring some other role within genetic counselling. It might, I don't necessarily think it would be, and I'm walking away and that's it. But I do think that, and I have always said it, that the moment that patients feel like work, real work, where kind of I'm not engaged in what they're saying, or I'm not being reflective or empathic, and that's gone, then it's time for a change. Because patients don't deserve it. They deserve the best from their genetic counsellor.
Nice. So you mentioned that, so for now, it doesn't feel like work.
So like any job, there are aspects of it that are work, documentation and, back and forth with an insurance company or whatever it is. There are aspects of it that are work. The actual counselling piece for me, one way I've heard someone describe what this is, and these are not my own words, but that fills my bucket. Engaging with humans. Helping someone get to a place where it's their own decision and they're making the right decision for them in that moment in time. It fills my bucket. It brings me joy. I as I said, even though I don't know if it's joy, it's not joy, it's fulfillment, where I might be talking about the most devastating piece of information ever, and at the end of the day, they turn around and thank me and how I'm a light in their day, and they felt understood in a way that they feel like no one's ever understood them. And sometimes that's just to do with listening, actively listening. It makes me sad that some people have gone through many years of certain medical ailments and they've never felt heard or never really felt like anybody's really listening to them. And that makes me sad. And sometimes it's all...
It's so common too.
Exactly. And sometimes I think it's humans just want to be heard. and listen to. And if that's all I do, which is all I can do sometimes, if I don't have a test available or I can't give a clinical diagnosis over the phone, that's not what I do. But sometimes it is an hour's long appointment and all I'm doing is listening. And that's enough sometimes for some people to say, I hear you. I hear your pain. It's real. You're not making it up. You're not crazy. And sometimes that's all some people need.
Yeah. So where would you say you are at on your journey towards your purpose? Would you say you found it, working on it? Are you living it?
Oh, we're always evolving. Always, always, always. And it speaks to that, if you get to a point and you're becoming mechanical, and I say that's when I would stop. If you don't evolve, then I think you can become mechanical. I think one of the beauties of the field that we work in is that of the 20,000 genes in the body, we know somewhere between 4,500, 5,500 of them, what they actually do with regards to their normal job and their role in our bodies, and therefore what it means when they don't work. So that means that there's a good 15,000, 16,000 genes that we've still to discover. So I've still got a lot to learn. We're discovering new genes all the time, what they do, what their job is. And we are not only discovering new genes all the time and what they do, but we're also the expansion, the massive amount of work that's going into gene therapy, for example, personalized medicine. There's always something new to learn. There's new things have come on my desk in the past 3 years since I've taken on the job that I do now, and it's maybe pharmacogenomics or some small pharma company coming up with a new medication, but you have to have a certain genetic marker, and these things are huge. And so it's ever changing, and there's always something new to learn. And part of that, I think, just feeds into, sometimes it's overwhelming because it's how on earth do you keep up with all of the new information about genetics? But in some level, there's always something new to learn, and you just keep evolving. The field keeps evolving. I don't think I'm going anywhere anytime soon. We need more. We need more genetic counselors.
Yeah, yes, me too. That's great. And what would you say in words, what your purpose is?
My purpose is, what is my purpose? Yeah, I think I said it early on. Helping someone navigate and understand something so personal, but something quite complex, and help them walk through a little piece of that journey. For me, it's an absolute privilege to be a part of something that is so personal. Nothing more personal than your genes. It's what makes you who you are. And something so, people open up in ways and share something, again, personal. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one through a certain condition. And for me to get to help them through a small piece of that journey with that condition, be it coordinate their testing or help them understand their test results or think about what it means for family planning, it is an absolute privilege, and it's not something that I take for granted. And it's not something that I can, pick up the phone and have a 20-minute conversation giving them the facts of inheritance. If you test positive, your kids will get a 50% chance, or, if it's a dominant condition, or 25% chance if you and your husband are carriers. That's just facts, and that's not what I do. I take facts and I couple that with the human component, and the personalized facts and what that means for them. And it's an absolute privilege to get to help someone understand something so personal.
Yeah, I was just thinking how in our society it's not normal to have such deep, meaningful connection with people over something so true to someone's being and essence. And I think a lot of people go through life craving that. And you touch upon this fact of how a lot of times they would thank you for being there, listening empathetically. So yeah, I think what you just said just made me realize that there's a lot we can do in our society to form better, meaningful connection with one another. And I think for many of us, having that satisfied a lot of innate needs that we have. I don't know where I'm going with this, but when you said that what you're doing is like a privilege that gives you a lot of purpose, that reminded me of that. What's your take on that?
I had a conversation recently with a good friend who's writing a book. She's a co-author on a book, How to Help People. And kind of a little bit about what you were talking about there, as part of the interview for her book, we talked a lot about society and how we, we'll walk past, I don't know, the homeless guy in the corner, and it's like we don't see him there. Some people maybe stop every day and say hi and have a chat. What's the difference? Why does one person stop and not another? And it's, for me, I think it's innate in me, where I maybe step up to try and help even when it's not needed. I see somebody maybe holding a map or saying, oh, do you think it's this way or that way? I just immediately butt in. Do you need directions? As like with what I do in my job, if they don't need directions and they don't need help, they'll tell me. And if they do need directions, then there we go. I've been a part of that. And it's the same thing with the type of questions that I'm asking. I have to get after some very personal pieces of information, and you just ask the question. Honestly, you're coming at it from a genuine place, and it's a genuine, the answer is going to make a difference to your assessment. And so I just approach all humans really with it's a genuine interest in who they are. I just have as I said right at the very start, a genuine affinity for human beings. It's your next potential best friend that you just haven't said hello to yet. And I think there's a real, I don't know if it's technology, I don't know what it is that has made society maybe more closed. We don't ask the personal questions anymore. You greet someone, hey, how are you? The response is, I'm good, thanks, how are you? And I respond honestly, oh, I'm doing okay, having a bit of a rough day. And people weren't ready, they're not ready for an answer. They're not asking, how are you? Because they care how you are. That is just like saying hello. And I don't know what it is that's got us to a place where we don't really ask real questions anymore. I don't know why.
A lot of us are just responding mechanically.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you mentioned how you were always very involved in building human connections. Is there a particular experience or a memory in your childhood or your past that really taught you, oh, wow, this is something that we all need, and I enjoy doing this, and then that kind of set you to this direction?
Yeah, I always had, even as a very young child, I had an affinity for hanging out with the adults. My older sister would go and, play with friends or cousins or whatever. And I always wanted to, if ever there was any family gathering, I wanted to be part in the living room where the adults were, listening to everything that was going on. And then as I get slightly older, still in childhood, I had several great aunts, who they lived close by, and my mom would be looking for me, and I would be in a great aunt's house, just polishing her brassware or her silver, or just hanging out and having a chat about nothing. Really, maybe just listening to the radio or talking about, how school was going. And I just had an affinity to spend time with elderly family members who never had a lot of company and really never had a lot of human interaction. And it brought me great joy to just hang out with them for many hours. My mum would be like, where are you? Where have you been? Oh, it was up at Aunt Agnes's, just hanging out. And my own grandmother, she was diagnosed with dementia very young, at 49, and I was young at the time, 7 or 8, maybe 9. And my grandmother kind of lost a lot of trust in many family members, and for a long time I was the only person in the family that she would let in or let make her something to eat, and that she would actually eat it. She never trusted people. And that was where I was thinking about how human interaction, but yet the whole genetic component, was actually playing a role in my life from a really young age, and I never realised it. She had early onset dementia. It's now something I work with regularly. And so it had an impact on me from a very, very early age. And I was far too young to realise that I enjoyed being around humans when I was doing that. I just did it because I liked it. And then through teenage years into adulthood, I was just a social butterfly. I just would talk to people all over because everybody had something different to say and they were interesting. And I never really, I don't think, was aware of it until my husband highlighted that people are different when you talk to them. And so that was the first time really that I realized it. I thought, I'm just being me. Like I'm just being me. So it was the first time I really sat down and thought about it, that happens. And then it made me feel quite uncomfortable because I'm just being me. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to change this. This is who I am. This is what you're going to get. You're just getting me. But yeah, it was well into my 20s that I realized that apparently I was quite good at talking to people.
Yeah, great. From your personal experience, what sort of advice would you give to someone who's trying to figure out their own purpose in life? And also to someone who might have found out what their purpose is, but they're too afraid to step into it. What sort of advice do you have to give to those people?
Yeah. I said it earlier, listening to a couple of things, listening to your gut. There's a whole nervous system in there. It's like their second brain. Listen to it. And sometimes some individuals need a couple of nudges from that internal voice. And sometimes it involves trying to quieten the noise around you. You're too busy looking for the answer, that the answer's there the whole time talking to you, but there's too much noise that you don't hear it. And that's a hard thing to explain, this innate voice. And it's also, so listening to that when you can, and also understanding what you don't want to do, I think is key. And if what you are doing right now is really what you don't want to do, then listen to that. It's another piece of it. Understanding what you don't like and what you don't want to do can be as important as finding that what you do want to do, if not more important. Going back to college to do my biology studies, I was older, late 20s. Fear is real. You don't want to make a fool of yourself. You don't want to, stand out in the crowd. You don't want to, what if I don't do well? What am I doing here? I'm almost 30 and I'm going back to college. What's happening here? Fear can be very debilitating and can really stop you moving forward. And, that fear of what if I fall? And many of us have seen the meme, but what if you fly, my dear, right? Like you might fly. And I have a real debilitating fear of public speaking, funnily enough. She says as she's doing a podcast, no audience, but I have a real debilitating fear of speaking. And through college, the job that I do, I've had to give many, many presentations. And I always tell myself, what's the worst thing that can happen? And I always land on, you could spontaneously combust. Well, that's not going to happen. So everything else is okay. And I think when people have that fear of taking that leap, ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen? And also reassuring yourself, you can always come back to the place wherever you are now. You can always come back. So try it. Take the leap. If the worst thing that can happen is you spontaneously combust, it's probably not going to happen. So go try it. But you can always come back to where you started from. And that was something that we realized moving across the Atlantic. What was the worst thing that could happen? Doesn't work out. We can always go back. We moved to the East Coast. What's the worst thing that can happen? We can always come back. So I think having that reassurance and almost a safety net, if you like, that you can come back. And who knows what can happen if you take the leap? What if you fly? Could be the best thing that ever happened. And surely that's worth a shot.
Yeah. Most decisions are not permanent, really.
Right.
You can always change your mind down the line. Great. Thank you for sharing those great advice. Now, I'd like to move on to our lightning round. I'm going to ask you a bunch of short rapid fire questions. Yeah. And you could just answer with a word or a sentence. So, what is one thing you like to do to relax?
Sleep.
What's one thing you like to do for fun?
Ski.
What's one thing that makes you enthusiastic?
People.
What is one habit you always do for a great day?
Brush my teeth.
And what is one habit you are working on or would like to have?
Oh, self-care, meditation.
What is the most important lesson you've ever learned? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Most important lesson? My goodness. Trust your gut. Yes. And also, can I give you a second one? Even though it's quick fire. Be yourself.
You want to expand on that?
Yeah, just be yourself.
Feel free to.
Yeah. Number one, everyone else is taken. And number two, when you are yourself, people recognize it and you come across as genuine. And I think it's easy to recognize when someone is being fake. And so just be yourself. It's a lot more endearing. And yeah, everyone else is taken.
Why do you think that's so hard to be yourself?
I think some people are hung up on who they think they should be or who they think other people think they should be, when who I am is me, and how other people perceive that is entirely up to them. And it's, if they don't warm to me, that's fine, and if they do, that's also fine. But I think it's easy to see when someone's not being their true self and they're trying to be something else, and it becomes not endearing.
Yeah. What is a book that changed your life?
A book that changed my life. Well, there's one textbook, and it's The Cell. It's a massive textbook, and that changed my world. When I was working in the lab, that changed my world because it introduced me to biology way back when. I was an analytical chemist, but Crime and Punishment, I would say, maybe changed my life because it got me reading books.
If you are not doing what you are doing today, what will you be doing instead?
You mean professionally? Oh, maybe being a ski instructor.
Ah.
Because you get to talk to people.
Right. Yeah. And you get to do what you like to do most for fun too. Nice.
Combining those two things again. Yeah.
Cool. And how would you describe your ideal life?
I'm probably living it.
Nice. It's great to hear.
I'm probably living it. I don't wish for the something else. I am exceptionally lucky in the position I'm in. I have a wonderful husband. We are soulmates. We've got so many interests in common. We are in a very fortunate position that we get to do the hobbies that we love to do. We're choosing to live in a beautiful part of the world, and I get to help people every day for a job. Yeah, I don't live to. I don't dream of something else. So it's more than enough. And a day does not go past where I don't appreciate how fortunate I am with everything, all of the aspects of my life. A lot of work went into getting here, but the work has been worth it.
Great, that's amazing. How do you define purpose?
It's like, what's the point of you, right? It's like, what's your point? Purpose. That's a tough one. How to actually define it. It is, I would say, a combination. Well, it's your reason for being, right? In some sense, your reason for being. But it's a balance between contribution and reward. So what do you give and get in return? And what are those? And that they're different for everyone.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I do this podcast called A Working Purpose. And I haven't really come up with my own definition yet.
Well, that's just cheeky.
That's why I asked the question. So
yeah.
You guys can do the dirty work for me.
That's just not fair.
And lastly, definitely requests you would like our listeners to do.
Like one thing, like just...
Yeah, anything.
Just be yourself. I'm going to fall back on that all the time. Just be yourself. Just be genuine.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Claire, for being a part of A Working Purpose podcast. It was so amazing to talk to you. Thank you so much for this lovely discussion.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a privilege.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode with Claire Egan and got inspired by her story of how she found her life's purpose, and take her advice to heart so you too can become a work in purpose. If you would like to support this podcast, please subscribe, tell your friends about it, and rate it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Please also follow A Work in Purpose on Instagram and Facebook, and join our Facebook group. Thank you so much for listening. May your present moment, now and forever, be filled with light, love, and joy. Until next time, this is Wing, and you are listening to A Work in Purpose.